Chapter 15. Silence held in the little office for a long moment after Shane was gone. It was Loren who broke it.
Clark, you won't do as he says.
She was forcing the words out.
You wouldn't go after Fay Dutcher.
He knew what she was thinking, what everyone would think. His answer was grim. I'll go after him, all right.
I know he did wrong. Nobody questions that.
Loren's words were gentle.
But Clark, he was your friend. Don't go after him.
She went on impulsively.
Send one of your deputies. Surely you don't want to remember that you brought him back and threw him in jail.
It was a fantastic moment to stand there and listen while she reminded him of how unpleasant the job ahead of him was. How I feel about it doesn't matter, he answered woodenly. It is the law. She regarded him thoughtfully, tiny furrows marring the smoothness of her brow.
There are times when I doubt whether I wholly understand this law of yours, she told him steadily. However, since you're busy... She broke off on a practical note, turning towards the door. Rayburn had the feeling she was deeply provoked by him. Checking with the impulse to call her back, he listened sourly to the crisp click of her heels down the corridor. What could he have said? A lot of folks are going to be waiting for me to explain myself, he brooded, and then after a moment, well, they elected me sheriff. Delaying only long enough to hunt up Gift Nailer and inform him that the office might be his to hold down for several days, Rayburn saddled up and struck out of town. Beyond a general idea, he had no knowledge of where Dutcher would be found. But he had not forgotten the manner in which word had been gotten to him in Reynold. Kathy Roberts had known how to get in touch with Fay, and with this thought in mind, he headed for Roberts stage station. The old Yates stage had just pulled out when he arrived. Stepping into the station, he found old Alamo alone and tipsy, ready to drink or gossip with anyone who turned up.
"Sit down, Sheriff," he invited cheerily. "I'll go get you a glass, and we'll drink a toast to law and order, or whatever they are."
He gawked over the weak jest. Rayburn halted before him, ignoring the invitation. "I want to speak with Kathy, Alamo."
"Ah?"
The old man blinked.
"You too?"
He caught himself there in some confusion.
"I reckon she's working around here somewhere, Rayburn. You know how to find her."
If Rayburn felt any curiosity about Alamo's unguarded information, it was answered when he came face to face with Kathy a few minutes later. For a moment he stared, arrested.
Well?
Kathy tossed her head impatiently, returning that look.
What's eating you now?
Rayburn grinned. "You, Kathy," he responded. "I hardly recognized you. Where's all the finery?" It was true that Kathy's appearance had taken a sudden turn for the better. Gone were the work-stained overalls she had been wont to wear for her chores around the station. Gone was the rumpled woolen shirt and scuffed boots. And in their place, Kathy wore a dark skirt and a crisp waist, and there was a ribbon in her auburn hair which was done up tidily. In fact, everything about her spoke of femininity. With it all, she had blossomed like a wild rose. Well aware of what he meant, Kathy was perversely irritated at having it called to her attention.
"What's the matter with you?" she snapped. "The way you talk, a person would think a girl never dressed up before."
His grin widened. If Kathy's outward appearance had changed, the same was scarcely true of her peppery temper. Angry flecks in her snapping green eyes, the added touch of color in her cheeks, made her prettier than he ever thought she could be. It would have been easy for a man to sue for her favor, but she was not for him.
Rayburn knew this when he caught the glint of a ring on her round brown finger. He laughed then. So, that's the answer, he twitted. Who is it, Kathy? Going suddenly fiery red, Kathy attempted too late to conceal the engagement ring, but after a moment she too laughed and held out her hand for him to see. Wilkin Landis, she said. Rayburn had all he could do to conceal his astonishment. He turned it into a warm expression of pleasure. Well, that's fine, Kathy, he exclaimed. I certainly wish you and Landis all the luck that there is. From his tone, there could be no doubt of his sincerity, but it was lost on her. Her lip curled, and with a momentary return of spirit she flashed. I haven't any doubt that you're relieved to see me disposed of. I crawled on the ground for you, Clark Rayburn, and you wouldn't have me. It was close enough to the truth to embarrass him considerably. Eyeing him, Kathy suddenly chuckled at his expression of chagrin. I think I know why you wasn't interested, Clark, if that was relieving your mind any. She sobered. But your place is in town. Why are you out here? I'm after Fay. It was said without enthusiasm. Kathy let it sink in, while she scrutinized his face as if wondering whether she had heard him right. After Fay, she echoed. You mean you'd arrest him? Rayburn nodded woodenly. Something happened to Kathy's eyes then. They went flat. Clark, you can't! She burst out sharply. There was iron in his face at that moment. Dutcher better not count on that, was all he said. Kathy made a gesture of impatience. But Clark, think what you're doing. You mustn't take Fay into custody. Why, you've ridden together and fought the same fight. In his way, Fay Dutcher has done as much as you did to bring Shane and Purcell to their knees. Is this the way you repay his loyalty to Cass Gunnarsson and the rest of us? He had the same chance as me, was the dogged answer. I advised him to go to Santa Fe and square himself, and he wouldn't listen. And this is what he gets for it. Kathy regarded him steadily, scorn working deeply into her face. You got it all explained to yourself, she said cuttingly. I wonder how you expect to explain it to the rest of the world. Fay would never allow himself to be taken, she went on. If he would not give himself up in that part in the range war, would he be likely to after robbing a bank? I suppose you know what this means, Clark? He was so aware of what it would mean that he had scarcely thought of anything else from the moment Dan Shane had given him the warrant. Yet he only shook his head stubbornly. I've sworn to uphold the law. You and your law! She cut him down contemptuously. She had changed again, with belligerently rapidity. Clark, you haven't rolled this over, she said urgently. Promise me you'll sleep on it. I know you'll change your mind. Nothing she could have said had the power to move him, however. I want to talk to him. At that point, he was firm as a rock. You can help me find him, Kathy. I will not, and be damned with you, Clark Rayburn, she said flatly. If you go after your best friend, you know what I'll be thinking of you. Not that it'll make any difference. He saw that he could not expect any help from her. It didn't matter, he said unhappily. Well, I better be on my way then. Go on, she fired after him hotly from the door, and I hope you lose it. There was food for 2 or 3 days in the slicker roll fastened at his cantle when he pulled away from Robert's station. He was crowding the limit hard when, 3 days later, he hauled up on a ridge deep into the pine-clad hills to glance about through the evening light and consider. For 3 days he had tried by every means in his power to cut Fay Dutcher's trail, and thus far he had not succeeded. Dutcher was at none of the old Bar 88 line camps, nor had he been at any of them recently. Rayburn had not found him holed up in any of the parks of the Guanalupes, and for all the evidence of his existence, he might have faded into thin air. He and the boys must have pulled out of the country, Rayburn reflected. They're flush now. No reason why they should stick around. For a moment he wondered if Fay had taken this means of making things easier for his old friend. Dutcher must have known that, as sheriff, Rayburn would have no choice but to come after him. But if he drifted out of the country, that would be the end of it. For a brief space, that solution seemed satisfactory. Rayburn shook his head then. It ain't Fay's way to turn his back on anything, he told himself. It'd be more like him to come at me and get it over with. He felt no resentment that this was so. He was like that himself. Friendship between Dutcher and him had simply pinched out. He must go on until he captured Dutcher. It was the intruding thought of food which gave him his idea. He remembered Kathy's story of how she had sought Fay in vain till she came to Estrella, the little Mexican hamlet on Hatchkita. Rayburn had gone there 2 days ago and found himself unable to learn anything. He knew why. To expect the Mexicans to betray their idol was folly, but that didn't prevent Rayburn doing something about it on his own accord. Well, I can get grub over there in Estella, he planned, and stick around till Dutcher shows up. He's bound to ride in sooner or later. My waiting in one place is the last thing he'd be looking for. Swinging his bronc, he headed for Estrella without delay. It carried him into pitchfork territory once more, but he cared nothing for that. It was late at night when he neared the little community on the Hatchtika. The place was plunged into darkness, except for a canteen on the lower end of the village, from the door of which an oblong light splashed across the dust. Rayburn swung down from his saddle in silence, and in silence he stepped to the door of the place, well aware that whoever inside had heard the sound of his pony's hooves and the squeak of leather. He was not surprised to find 3 stoic Mexicans, including the proprietor, blinking at him. Hola, Pedro, he greeted. A drink, amigo? It was set out. They waited for him to down it without a word, and Rayburn said, wiping his lips, My horse? Si, senor. I'll sleep here, I think. Rayburn glanced about coolly. A blanket, Pedro? But, senor. Stout and pudgy, his black eyes bulged. The proprietor exploded volubly. This was no hacienda. There was no place for the senior sheriff to sleep in Estrella. He deserved better things, and Rayburn, he waved this solicity aside. A blanket, I said, he repeated decisively. And concern yourself none at all about me, my friend. Pedro shrugged expressively with a helpless look on at his countryman. The Mexican showed Rayburn an inscrutable regard and left the cantina, their sandals whispering. Pedro disappeared as well. He was gone so long that Rayburn began to wonder as if he had been deserted. He glanced about the adobe and wattle hut speculatively, a fine spot to be cornered in. Only when the fat Mexican returned with the blanket did his back muscles relax. Okay, Pedro. You'll find me right here in the morning. Chocolate, poor and bitter, was all the breakfast he got. He made it do, leaving only long enough to make sure his horse had been cared for. He returned to the Mexican saloon and to the appropriated corner table, where he waited for the rest of the day. It was a strain on the dark-skinned men who drifted in from time to time. Surprised to find him still there, they downed their drinks swiftly and forgot altogether their love of gossip and their thin, brown-papered cigarettes, moving outside with a quickness to their step. Pedro occasionally gave him a stare of perplexity, but nobody said anything, save when Rayburn asked for some fresh food. Nothing whatsoever happened that day, or that evening. Rayburn had no intention of being frozen out. He was still there the following morning when, without any warning, shots sounded from a little distance, and then an exuberant cowboy whooped of white men. A startled look of alarm swept Pedro's fleshy face in a flash, and 3 Mexicans who happened to be in the place lifted keen, dark faces as if scenting quick trouble. "Just stay right where you are," Rayburn told them from his corner. "No need of getting excited about this." The ponies swept up before the door a moment later, and then a harsh laugh sounded, exuberant and reckless. "And now for a drink." It was the voice of Fay Dutcher. Rayburn froze where he was, waiting. He had already drawn his gun. He was trained unwaveringly on the door when boots scraped and Dutcher appeared in the opening. He got a flash of the gun first and of Rayburn's grim face next, and the surprise of it brought him up short. Only the wonderful control he exerted over himself brought a halt to his instinctive grab for his own weapon. Silence held for 10 seconds, and slowly Dutcher relaxed, an expression of wrath and chagrin stealing up behind his pale eyes. "That's better, Fay," Rayburn grunted. "There won't be any shooting here unless you start it." Dutcher continued to stare while his racing brain digested this setup. "Just what are you after?" he demanded finally. Rayburn's narrow regard never left his face. "You'll have to give yourself up, Fay," he said. "God knows I don't like any part of this, but there's that charge of bank robbery against you and the boys." Dutcher let that sink in. His glance roamed to Pedro and the others in the room and then came back to Rayburn. When he spoke, it was a hard, dry inflection. "I'll never give myself up," he said. Rayburn shook his head slightly, his eyes dwelling steadily upon the other. "You don't get it, Fay," he said softly. "Whatever we've been to each other in the past is forgotten now. We're on opposite sides of the law, and there's no way of changing it. It's either you or me." Still, Dutcher continued to measure the setup gingerly, as if asking himself whether a net had already been drawn around the village. His cautious had no effect whatsoever on his words. "Well, the hell with your law," he said deliberately. "You didn't need to say that," Rayburn told him. "I know how things stand with us. It doesn't make any difference, Fay. I'm coming after you until I get you." He was telling Dutcher that the way was clear, that this was a matter between themselves and no one else would interfere, and Fay got it. He grinned chillingly. "Well, come on a-shooting, Clark." There was an utter careless swagger in the challenge, and it told Rayburn unmistakably how far this man had gone since they had ridden the trails together and squatted side by side at the chuck wagon. Fay moved over to lean on the plank bar. It left the door unguarded, and Rayburn slid out from behind the table, making for the open. In the door, sheathing his gun, he paused for a last glance at Fay. The outlaw was regarding him in apparent indifference. "Be seeing you, Clark," he murmured. Rayburn nodded, and he stepped out. Bailey, Nick Martin, and Turk were coming this way from a tumble-down corral in which they had turned their horses, and they stiffened at the sight of him. Martin was the first to speak, and he appeared to be waiting for something. "Howdy, Clark," he greeted gruffly. "Hey, boys." Rayburn passed on. But not till he was well on his way back to Salt Creek did he shake off the feeling that he was still being watched, perhaps even followed. Dutcher was warned. He would know what to expect next time. Clark spent the night at Robert's Station, and riding into town the next morning, he noted signs of busy activity about Shane and Purcell's store. It was open and bustling, and on the roof a man with a hammer was taking down the company sign. "What's the idea?" Rayburn asked Naylor when they met a moment later, he jerking his head towards the store.
Well, looks like Shane sold out.
The deputy surprised him by saying,
Turned the business over to Jim Raylan and Ike Secord. Don't know just what the figure was, though. I understand Shane's retiring to the Pitchfork.
The concluded items of information were of more interest to Rayburn than anything else. He was still asking himself what it meant when, at noon that day, he almost collided with Shane himself in the door of the Sing Ho hash house on Main Street. Shane halted, and for an instant his eyes were opaque. He relaxed then.
I'd like a word with you, Rayburn,
he announced gruffly. "Fire away." Shane stepped outside and cleared his throat. He began abruptly.
I'm taking a headache off your shoulders, Rayburn. I'm withdrawing my charges against Dutcher.
If he had hoped for a surprise, he had succeeded. Rayburn's lips thinned. His gaze drew to a fine point. "Why?" he demanded sharply. Shane spread his hands.
Knife and Fay ain't going to help me any now. The business is gone. And from the things I've heard around town today, you won't find fault at being relieved of the job of jailing an old friend.
Such excuses as these, if excuses they were too thin for a moment's consideration. Rayburn made his decision without difficulty. His voice curt and flat, he said, "Your game don't fool me for a second, Shane. You're throwing your strength behind Dutcher now, and I don't know why, but you can paste this much to your hat. I'm going after him, and I'll get him." Shane shrugged, pretending surprise.
Of course, if you feel that way, I just thought I'd let you know I was helping you out.
"It's not me that'll be needing help around here, Shane." Rayburn closed their talk bluntly. "Think it over." He tossed over his shoulder as he turned away. End of chapter 15.